Hello, this is Transduction Signal on DubLab Radio. I'm your host, Trovarsi. Join me each month as we interview a special guest. We get into their live performance and we talk about their journey becoming a live artist, producer, and all the things that are happening in their lives. Before we get started this month, I would like to go a little further and introduce my new co-host, Orly Gal. I'm super excited to have her here. She's an amazing producer, record label owner. She's a live sound engineer. Hey, Orly, want to bring you on. But she has, you've been doing live sound, and I know now you want to get into live electronic music performance because you've been a live artist. You've been
Yes.
producing, right?
Yes, I've been producing. I play instruments. I come from that background, but now I'm transitioning into also trying to do live performance as an electronic artist as well. So I'm super excited to dive into this journey with you.
Yeah, this is great. So, I've been kind of playing live for a minute. You're diving in, and we thought this would be a great opportunity to have our viewers see both aspects and hear questions that from both angles to our guest. And I would like to now introduce our guest. Special guest, Corry Banks, aka BboyTechReport, aka founder of Modbap Modular, first black owned modular company. That's a lot. Welcome, Corry. We're
What's
so
going
happy to
on?
have you here.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. It's always good to chop it up with you. Good to meet you, Orly.
Yeah, we have a ton of questions for you. You and I talk, but
No
I
doubt.
I got so many questions for you, and I know Orly has questions for you. But before we do all that, we like to play your performance so everyone can hear your flavor, your style, and then yeah. So do you have any words for the listeners before we play your performance or?
Yeah. So when I started doing live performances, especially using modular and in this hip hop or mod bap context, this sort of fusion music that is mod bap. It was tough for me to wrap my head around when I would go to sets and I would hear people use modular. It didn't. Most times it was like these beautiful landscapes, or it would be very ambient, or it would be noise oriented, or it would be uh, you know dance music oriented. And when the way I was using modular at home, I just kind of always thought like, well, how am I ever going to take this out live? Because then how many the idea of doing live music beat sets or electronic music and hip hop and stuff, because live hip hop beat sets are very different than live sets with modular synthesis. And so somehow I had to learn to be able to not just combine these two things, but then also make it portable. And so what I ended up doing is, I have an 18U rack over here. I ended up paring it down to 3U or 6U, and then having some performance effect unit. And now that's Performer that sits next to my MPC. And so rather than doing like one long sort of composition that kind of goes through these different ebbs and flows, my sets are typically beat sets, but with modular synthesis. So in this particular set, everything that you hear has come from synthesizers. Even the drums, my module Trinity, I sampled all of the drums. I did some sound creation and sound design sessions and sampled all the drums into my MPC. And so then I just embellished it with synth stuff. So some stuff is coming off of the Eurorack, some stuff is sampled into the MPC, and kind of this is uh, that whole amalgamation of all those things together. So just to give you some context of what's what.
Nice, nice. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing it. All right, so I'll ask everyone the usual mute up, and here we go. Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah. Oh my gosh. That was great, Corey.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Every time I hear your sets, it's like I know you're gonna bring it. I just don't know where you're gonna go. Like, yeah, like this was had a very like nice sultry vibe to it. I don't know if it
Word.
was like your mood, like, or yeah, like
Yeah,
the
that project that I work on, because I tend to work on these things as projects in my MPC or Force or whatever thing I'm using. So I'll typically, you know, doing a um, uh, sound creation, like a sample library as I'm kind of creating the stuff. That's kind of how I start a project like that. And then whatever that vibe turns out being, I'll typically ride that that vibe out for. I'll look up and have maybe 50 different sequences on one project, and then I'll say, okay, I'm gonna go to sequence 60, and I'm gonna start to build this set out of all these sequences and duplicate and so yeah, it definitely was a vibe, and it kind of started with how I did the sound design for it.
dope. So okay, so we have questions. I know Orly has questions for you. So just for people that are we for viewers and for the listeners, can you just kind of give us like a run through of your setup? Just to
Sure.
yeah.
Sure. So the core of my setup is an MPC. Um, at least today, it's the MPC Live 2. I'll I'll sort of vacillate between the MPC 1, MPC Live, or the Force. Um, and so yeah, that's typically the core. So just on a side note, I know people say, "When is Modbap going to make a sequencer?" But I'm like, I get everything I need out of the MPC. So we'll see what that turns out to be. So anyway, it's the MPC at the core that has USB connectivity, MIDI connectivity. It has CV connectivity, and all of that. So what I'll do is I'll either run out of the MPC with MIDI to a MIDI to CV converter in my rack, or I'll just run CV directly out of the MPC into the rack. Excuse me. Sometimes I do both. In this case, it's I had a MIDI to CV converter, so I'm running out of the MPC with MIDI into the rack with that, and then that's converting CV, and then I'll run CV to my modules, and then everything that's coming out of the rack then gets run with two audio cables, a left and a right, into the sample input of the MPC. So that way, everything is coming, all of the main sound that's going to the house or whatever else it is, the audio interface is coming out of the MPC. So any sound that the rack is making is going directly into the sample input of the MPC. And then the MPC is just monitoring that sound so that it just becomes a part of the composition that's coming out of the MPC. And in this case, I've run out of the MPC into Performer for performance effects that sits next to my MPC. And that's what my performance effects are. And then out of that, I go into the house or the audio interface or whatever it might be. So to simplify it, MPC, Eurorack into the MPC, the audio part, and then out of that into a smaller performance module, the Performer, and for performance effects, and out to the house. So it's kind of a loop of those few things.
Nice. And then for those who don't know the performer, that was your first module,
Yeah.
right? For a
Yeah.
Modbap module.
Yeah, that was the first module that I released when I launched Modbap. So Performer actually helped me launch Modbap Modular in 2020.
That's where I was going to ask. I was looking up the trinities coming in from just being a live performer with instruments into this whole new super overwhelming world
Right, right.
of modular.
Yeah.
I started looking up the trinities because that effects are insane, and then I saw that you actually made those. So
Mhm.
can you like just go in just super briefly about how you got started making those, because that's a whole nother level of uh,
Yeah.
looking at things.
Yeah. Well, I was doing B-Boy Tech Report and blogging, doing tech blogging, tech reviews. The whole thing about B-Boy Tech Report as a blog was about reviewing things from a hip hop angle. And in those reviews, I started building relationships and end up becoming a beta tester for various companies and stuff. Um, all the while I would start to keep little journal sketches, drawings, or whatever of modules and things like that, and ideas. Um, and my the duality of my life is that I have a tech life and a music life, right? So I've always sort of lived that duality, doing tech stuff, IT stuff, and doing music, and not all too uncommon in that sense. But I've mentioned before that I have a degree in electronics, so I have some understanding of that stuff. And then living my tech life and blogging, somehow that all just kind of came around to an opportunity presented itself. Well, I guess that's kind of the way it is. I took the opportunity when it kind of looked like a door was cracked open. I said, listen, I have these ideas. I've been beta testing and giving some ideas and helping fix some bugs. I have some ideas of my own, and I just, I'm able to invest in my ideas, and so I just went for it. Ultimately, this duality that I've always lived, tech and music, I just found a way to converge them, and Eurorack and that sort of stuff seemed to be the way.
How well was it received in the hip hop community to coming into an electronic world, and vice versa? Was it well received, or was it easy to enter the electronic music community as a hip hop artist coming in with modulars onto that side?
I think there's a couple things there. I think I didn't know what to expect initially, but at the same time, I think, you know, it was very well received on both sides, more than I thought it would be, I think. The reality is in this whole synth world and electronic music of synths and modular and stuff, it's a very welcoming community, and we bond over these things that we nerd out over. And so that was like just an easy thing. And I can't say it's all too different on the other side. I had people hitting me up that I've listened to their music for years, and would never even think that they even saw anything or knew anything about anything that I do. And I'd have people reaching out to me saying, yo, I dig what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. And I'm thinking like, yo, I've been listening to this guy's music or that guy's music and this guy's music forever. So that's from the hip hop community at the highest heights of that. So I think I was pleasantly surprised to just see, I think when you're authentic and you're just being your authentic self, somehow that's magnetic and that people relate to it. So I don't think I was inauthentic on either side of that fence. And so it just kind of works.
I think that's outstanding to hear, for, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
So Corey, then just to kind of piggyback on that, just for our listeners here too, can you explain the like Modbap, boom bap, hip hop? Like, can you
Yeah.
kind of give us just a quick, just
Yeah, yeah, sort of,
yeah,
certainly. So, I mean, boom bap is kind of indicative to. I honestly, I look at boom bap and lo-fi. That's classic hip hop in my mind. It's interesting to see lo-fi take off and have this huge following. I love that. But the reality is that basically is the sound of the late 80s and 90s in hip hop. You know what I mean? That ultimately that is boom bap.
mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? There's some classic artists and some people that are like just kings of the boom bap. People like DJ Premier, if you want examples, or Marley Marl. I mean, you know what I mean? Like just kind of juggernauts, Jay Dilla, certain folks like that are just juggernauts of boom bap. And there's certain techniques that we've learned over the years and that have come about over the years and use with whatever samplers that are popular at the moment, that are the foundation of how we make hip hop. Boom bap is my sort of the my I guess style of choice of hip hop. And but then you have stuff like trap and that sort of thing, which is more trap is more electronic, but more it's electronic and hip hop leaning, heavily hip hop leaning, but electronic nonetheless. And so, but that stuff has always kind of been a part of hip hop, and I guess it just is on the person that's doing it to interpret it. And so, when it comes down back to me, knowing that I kind of was raised on hip hop, and when I started producing beats, it was all about boom bap and that sort of thing. I sort of mastered those techniques over the years and whatever I could do to kind of learn those things. But I've always felt a certain pulling towards synthesis. And, then I started learning about certain synthesis and got some sense and thought I knew synthesis, and then got into modular and realized I didn't know synthesis. Had to learn all the things all again. And then, it just kind of combining synthesis and modular synthesis with the boom bap techniques that I had, and called it Modbap, for modular boom bap. You know what I mean? It's just it's a fusion music of boom bap, hip hop, and modular synthesis and electronic music, but very hip hop leaning though.
Right, right. No, yeah, it sounds great, and I love the fact you also came out with an album with a bunch of Modbap artists too. There was
Yeah.
like a various artists, but just like having that modular essence of hearing those arps and those
Mhm.
the synths is that's kind of like has that signature sound to it.
Yeah, totally, totally. Because I love arpeggiators, and like it's
Mm.
interesting. Like, arpeggiators are meant to be very, rigid, because it's literally like you hold a chord, and then whatever time signature you have it on, the time division you have it on, is gonna hit each note of that chord per the time signature. And there's something very rigid and beautiful about what an arpeggiator can bring to things. But then when I started really digging into synths, I love the idea of, whatever the beat is doing and how I've programmed it. You know, the way I used to sample is I would sample long passages, maybe detune things and let things sort of ring out past the place where the timing signature would like it to. So when I'm playing a beat and I'm like chopping a sample and hitting it, you may hear things like fall in a weird way. Because of the way I've chopped it a little longer than it needs to be. And then if I mute something or turn a sample off, it's not choking, so then it'll ride out a little more. And so I play with these little time things like that when I'm sort of doing mute groups and performing. And arpeggiators were able to provide me with that sort of thing. So like, why not just play the chord and let the arpeggiator sort of play out, but then you can kind of, go to the next chord, and depending on how you dropping it on the one, or not dropping it on the one, or dropping it just behind, or beginning the arp just behind the note or just in front of the note, you start to get these weird push and pulls and stuff with arpeggiators. So I always loved playing with arpeggiators, and I guess it did kind of become a bit of a signature of the sound a bit.
Yeah, it's dope, I think.
Word, word. Thank you.
Does your making the instrument, like visualizing what it's actually going to look like, translate into sound for you when you're in the process of making things?
I think so. It's interesting. I was just talking to somebody about this the other day, because I'm always working on the next thing, and so I was kind of mocking up some stuff, and then so what I'll do is I'll mock up visually what I want the thing. I'll already have an idea of what I want the end result to do, but then I'll kind of, now let's make it practical in the mock up, because everything is, precise measurements, and all these different things are there. So then I'll kind of decide on how big do I want this thing to be, how much space do I want it to take up. And a lot of times I'm designing from a perspective that I have this vision of a system, and where does this fit in? From a sound perspective, what's this give me, and how does it fit physically in this system that I'm building? And so I'm kind of thinking from all those different angles, like visually, this is what it needs to be to do this thing, and here's what I'm hearing out of it. And then I'll work with my devs from there. And I'm literally tuning, as we're developing, I'm tuning the sound or the end result, um, as we're kind of developing things. And so yeah, I guess I kind of hear the sound and kind of know the end result that I want to get. And we'll just kind of work from a mock-up from a visual perspective, and keep it moving through the process like that.
That's super cool. I'm assuming that that affects in festival form or performance form, whether it's a club or a festival, what type of um, rig you're going to take with you,
Hmm.
uh, right? So
Yeah,
you
totally.
know, from the, and on that note, what is your favorite, like what has been your favorite environment to play um, festival, club, Chicago, I don't know, anywhere in the
Well,
world?
I'll tell you, I have not had the pleasure of playing a festival, but I mean, I really like clubs are dope for the reason that if the sound system is right, man, there's nothing like hearing what you've made playing back at you in a club with a system that's incredible. You know, and I used to think the same thing when I had a band back in the day. When I was living in Chicago, I had a band and we played at, you know how it is when you're kind of starting out playing, you play at, these places that are kind of like this. And then if you continue and you're getting good enough, you start to play at these places, right? And
Right.
just to kind of get to those places and played a wild hair in Chicago at one point with my band was like mind blowing, but it was mostly because of how good the music sounded in that club. You know what I mean? And I had the similar experience here too, just before the pandemic when I played the Troubadour, opening up for J Electronica with my man. Voltage controller. And so that was like really dope because the sound system was ill, absolutely ill. And we were playing. See, and that's the other thing that we're playing to a crowd that came there to hear a prominent hip hop artist. And when we dropped it, they were open. Like, you know what I mean? It was like they were wide open. And just hearing that response and hearing the system with, my joints that I made here in this very chair glaring back at me with all of the heaviness and melodic and effects is incredible. I love that.
That's fantastic to hear. Yeah, I'm really
Yeah.
surprised you haven't played festivals yet. I'm really like I'm looking forward to hearing that type of sound in like.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. I'm looking
I
forward
feel I
to it
feel like
too. I'm
it's
open
coming.
to it. I'm open to it.
I'm surprised
Yeah.
this like movement is right there next door. You know,
Yeah,
so
yeah. I'm down. Whenever somebody approaches me and wants me to do that, I'm with it.
hip
Nice.
hop versus electronic music. Where do you lean nowadays? Um,
I'm always hip hop. Like and more than anything, I'm always into hip hop and playing hip hop, and you know, that's just where my heart is.
Yeah, because you mentioned a band where you used. So tell us a little bit about that, because
Mhm.
that's a little bit about your background there. How you.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I started out as an MC. All through the '90s and early 2000s, I was an MC, and I was with a group where we would do shows with DJ and the typical hip hop group type of thing. And then eventually, when I end up started doing solo stuff, I put together a band of these were my friends, and they happened to be dope musicians. As we tend to have friends that are dope musicians, and so they already had a band. And so I was like, yo, I want to start performing again. I've made all these songs and created all these joints. So I want to get out there and start performing. So their name was Baby Brother. And interested, not related in any way to Lil Brother, but their name was Baby Brother. They were already performing. They were kind of like a soul band, excuse me. And so I got with them and started performing around town, and we did lots of shows, and it was kind of like a roots sort of thing, and it was always just a lot of fun. And then when I moved from Chicago and came here, I formed a band. I basically put together a band before the first year was over, before I'd lived my first year in LA, and we basically did the same thing. So we were just playing around and doing different things. But I started realizing like, oh man, I think I got burnout on club scene, that sort of live band club scene thing. Um, and eventually I just started, from there I would then perform a little bit with just my DJ. So I always had a DJ and a band together. And then what that did is it would allow us to do like full band of just me and the DJ, and we could kind of twist things up a little bit. But all of that time I was learning more about production, and I had gotten more into production. And at some point, I was just thinking about it the other day, I do not know. I remember I was listening to a song that I recorded. I was like, is that the last song I recorded with vocals? Like, when did it? I never made a conscious decision to say, I'm gonna just make beats now. But somehow I've just been so intrigued and so into sharpening the steel and kind of getting better with certain skill that that's been my focus more than anything.
I was going to ask you that. That was like my next question. Like, I have not. Have you thought about that now that you've kind of laid this foundation, Modbap, you have your company, you're making these dope modules, like kind of circling back and going back to that MC that
I
lives
have.
within you?
I have because I mean, I'm pretty damn good at it. You know what I mean? And I haven't flexed that muscle in a while. And it's kind of like what I hear comedians talk about when they're like, "Yo, um, if there's a certain exercise, there's a muscle you got to exercise. If you're a stand-up comedian, you got to be going to the club and doing stand-up." And I feel like that's a similar thing. You know what I mean? Like if ciphers are important, and being around other MCs are important, being around people that are living and walking that life is important at doing that stuff. And I've always had like that sort of crew around me, and as of late I've been so much in my little cocoon over here in this sort of thing that I just haven't been a part of that sort of setting, right? So I do think about sort of dusting off the skill and jumping back in there. And honestly, I think it would be something really dope to do when I'm doing live beat sets. And I think we talked about it once, Trovarsi, when I saw you. Um, you were performing and you did some vocals and stuff, and I had been thinking about it already. I was like, I need to pull that situation together for myself. So I mean, you never know.
I
I
think
don't
you
I don't
should,
count it
yeah.
out. I don't count it out. I still write. I just don't record. You know what I mean?
Has the DJ bug bit you yet? Are you
No,
like at all interested in it?
no, it has not. It has not. I feel like um, it's an interesting thing. I have not really thought much about it, but I will say, performing live and doing live beat sets and live electronic sets is such a different beast. And sometimes it can get pressurized when you're getting ready for a performance and you're like, I'm putting together all these things. So I often think like, you know what, if I incorporated DJing into this thing, then I got all of these pre-recorded beats that I can start to play at joints too. You know what I mean? Incorporate different things. So I guess I've given it some thought, but I haven't put any effort to going in that direction just yet.
What does your like before going out, the process of getting ready for a show like? Do you have lists that you actually make with the amount of gear that you have, the cables that you have to bring? Because I can only see the amount of cables that go into, you know?
Yeah,
So you have to be like super anal with
yeah.
the
Well, you know what? So I'll tell you, I got this little bundle of cables here, right? And this is
right.
probably a good example. Um, this is this little snake that I've rigged together. This is the Eurorack end of the business right
Right.
here. This is the MPC end of it. These black cables, and as you can see, they're labeled in a certain way.
Yeah.
And so they're like 1, 2, 3, 4. That's what the tape says. 1, 2, 3, 4. They are actually breakout cables. So even though this is one cable, you'll see that it splits at the end. And so I'm actually having this connected to my MPC, and the other end breaks out so that's 4 connections. This breaks out to 8 CV that runs to my Eurorack. And so it keeps it pretty simple for me because everything that's patched in the Eurorack is patched in the Eurorack from
Sorry.
whatever I've been working on, right? And so that's just the way that'll be, is just kind of in the rack. But then when I'm ready to perform, I'll just disconnect this snake from the MPC and I'll wrap that guy up like so. And it's still connected on one end to the Eurorack. So when I wrap it all up, I just put it in the case, close up the case, take everything that I would need as far as power, and then I go. And when I get to the jam, I've done it enough that I know that, I just take these 4 black connections, plug it into 1, 2, 3, and 4 as indicated by the tape, and then turn the power on, load the session, and let's go.
So you're not changing your setup for like from show to show, like as far as equipment, you know exactly it's all the same. Ready
Yeah,
to go.
most times, like as a matter of fact, My
You were using the
patches,
force for a minute, right?
yeah, I was using the
Yeah.
force for a minute, and so it would just be, um, I found a way to sometimes with Eurorack, you have to capture things and be able to capture things and play them back, right? And because I would change the Eurorack a lot, I would actually capture the loops of certain things and sequence them in certain ways, but then I would keep certain parts not captured in audio so that I can use that live, the going directly out of the Eurorack. And so I have to find this balance of doing that so I could still have some sort of free form play at some point and but still be able to, like, I like to be able to recognize what I'm playing. Right, so sometimes the patch is the same as it's been for the last couple of months, and I'll have a ton of stuff that I've sampled, redid, and hooked up and resequenced in the MPC, but then I could kind of have some freeform play in the Eurorack, and that patch may not change a ton. It may have changed over the time leading up to the show, but usually the last couple of weeks leading up to the show, the patch is what it is, and I'm just kind of disconnected and reconnected and going with what I've been messing with over the last whatever that timeline is.
So, question for you then. So, because you're either using like the MPC Live 2 or the Force, and you're using that as your sequencer, does that help you then? Because you can always just swap out whatever voice
Hmm.
module that you want, right? Like
Yeah.
to that MIDI. So, does that
Hmm.
kind of give you the freedom to make those changes? Is that, and,
Yeah, I mean,
or do you do that or not really? Or,
I will say that before I started making my own modules, I would swap out the different parts a lot. But now I feel like every time I'm seen, it's expected that they're going to see Modbap stuff like equipment, right? So I typically don't switch out the modules as much as I used to. Um, but the thing that with Osiris, it's a wavetable oscillator, so it has a huge swath of sounds that is capable of making. Um, so I've kind of gotten used to being able to dial up the sound that I want out of it for this particular thing. And if I think I want to change the sound, then I've done that, but I do that sparingly. If I think I want to change the oscillator sound, I've done that, but I'll do it sparingly. What I'll tend to do is I'll veer off course while I'm preparing for the set, sample those pieces, and then be able to still use the oscillator as it is for the live pieces. You know what I mean? So then I can kind of switch up the sound a
yes.
little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like that now that you've created this module line, right? And so, I mean, you pretty much have. I mean, you just don't have a sequencer. You have like a full line that's
Yeah.
of good palette.
Hmm.
Do you find that you're able to streamline and make more music now that you don't feel like you have to be changing things all the time, or do you?
I definitely do. I'll tell you that my 18U rack, although I have um, a soft spot for a lot of these modules that is in my 18U 104 rack, I don't touch them anymore. And it's just, you know what I mean? I
I
really,
do.
yeah, yeah, right. And it's because I'm literally always flying between testing a prototype that I sometimes have to put away when I'm doing something like this that I don't want to be seen. I'm literally always flying between testing a prototype and getting ready for some sort of performance, or maybe I'm making beats in my leisure, but usually that's as a result of testing a thing, right? And so yeah, I have 6 products now. I don't have a couple things, sequencer or modulation sources, right? And at some point I'll get around to that, but yeah, I definitely have a great sound palette of modules that make up the current product line. And so I'm always just kind of digging in and figuring out, like recently, earlier this year, when I released Meridian, which is a filter, um, uh, it was dope to be able to throw that in my system and start to see and explore how Osiris, the oscillator, plays with the filter, because of my initial thought, couple years ago was that I was going to do those back to back because they're kind of meant to be together. And so it was nice to finally get that prototype in the case and start to work with it and really start to see like, oh, in theory, this is what I intended to do. But now seeing Osiris run through the filter Meridian and then that inspires all new stuff. Like now I'm making, beats based off of these things that I've dreamed up and worked with developers to develop. And so it's an interesting circle of stuff though. But I'm always kind of focused in on this Modbap sort of system that is growing and growing.
Very cool.
How are you dividing your time between, like, what does your day look like day to day? Because I see the amount of things that you have on your plate between the Modbap community and then also creating all these new modules for your own line and then shows and then producing. Like, what does an actual schedule look like for you?
So I would say, I think some people are still surprised to see that I still have a day job, right? So that's a part of the schedule. But fortunately, work from home and those kinds of things. So typical day is, 3 days a week, I'm up and at 'em going to the day job. In the evening, I'm doing business, or maybe even sometimes during, breaks in the day, I'm doing business, arranging whatever it might be for what the focus is for Modbap at the moment. There's always support to do for Modbap when people might have a question or an issue. So I'll spend some time in the day responding to messages or responding to people in the DMs or wherever they might reach out to me and have questions. I may have to arrange an RMA. So there's that kind of support stuff that goes on. And then, for instance, this week, um, having a beat set ready, having another interview that I did on Friday, and then doing this one now. Like that could be a typical week. Like I could have a couple of interviews, whether they might be written or. Um, well, a couple of weeks ago, I had to get ready with a beat set and then also speak to a class. I think it was Arizona, a school in Arizona. And so, I mean, it could be any number of things from depends on what mode I'm in. And then probably about 4 times a year, maybe more, I'm at a convention exhibiting as Modbap. So then there's always this what stage of Modbap business am I in? Am I getting a product ready? Am I presenting a product? Am I getting ready for a show? Am I getting ready to exhibit? Am I speaking to somebody? Like, I don't know how all this stuff kind of became like this, but it literally is. I just take it for what's in front of me. Like, this is what I have to get done by the end of the week. This is what I'm focused on. So it just really depends on what it is.
Nice. Are we going to see you at NobCon this year?
Yep, I'll be there. I'll be exhibiting at NobCon.
Excellent.
Yep.
So I do have one question. I know we're getting closer to the top of the hour, but
Sure.
if you have somebody who's new, I always ask like, hey, what would you tell somebody that's starting out? But now you have Orly sitting right here. what would you, what would you tell her? Like starting diving into this fresh.
Into
She's a seasoned producer,
yeah.
so she's writes music and that, but now taking the live electronic aspect and now wanting to play her productions live. Like what's your recommendation? Like just a few
Um,
tips.
yeah, certainly. So for what I had to realize, it's so easy for us to be in the studio with all of our things, right? Like, and whatever that means, we make it very comfortable for us to create in the way that we like to create in the studio, right? What I struggled with initially is how do I translate what I'm doing in here and in its full regale to what's happening there? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how do I take this to the club? How do I take this to whatever storefront or in store, whatever the performance is going to be? And so I had to figure out how to pare down things, and that was a process. So I think when you start to think about how do you capture as much of your magic away from the studio, you know what I mean? And I think for me that meant realizing how much do I want to pre-record, sample, and sequence versus how much I want to play live. So then maybe that might look like, and I think that's not a different scenario for any live musician. I know drummers who have stuff that they play in loops and stuff that they play live over it. I mean, you know, um, it's probably not very different from anybody, but I think figuring out that balance of how you take all of your magic with you without breaking your back with the stuff that you bring with you for the live stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really big thing. And it was huge for me because I think when I started playing live, I started realizing the importance of having a focused Eurorack system. Um, Whereas in the studio, you just kind of have the luxury of having all these things everywhere, and like I'll patch into that when I'm ready to use that. It's just right here. You know what I
Right.
mean?
And then trying to
Whereas
like figure out
how to
put it
call it
all into
all
one
down,
thing.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
how do you call it all down into a rack? So then I started uh I eventually went with 6U104 and I've rocked that thing. There was so much in there to be able to rock. But then I wanted to pare that down because I realized like, man, I'm carrying too much stuff with me. So I think that thing, once you kind of figure out how you can pare it down, and then practicing for me meant a lot too. Because then, you know, you're playing some stuff live and you're arranging some stuff live, and certain things I want to land in a certain way. So I would start recording myself, either audio or video or both. And then I would critique it almost like some sort of basketball game or something in the locker room.
And if
So
you had no Eurorack at all, and your first piece of equipment that you were going to go and buy, what would that be to get started?
the force.
The Force.
I
Okay.
can't lie. And even though I haven't used the Force live in a little while, the Force is my absolute favorite piece of gear for live performing because it just has so much that it can do. I think people don't realize how powerful the Force is, and the fact that it is untethered and you don't have to be connected to anything. I can put my Force under my arm and go to the place with all my music in it, and I could just say, "Give me like 2/4 inch connections into it, and I'll load up my session." And even without Eurorack there, I can go through a dynamite set. So the Force, whatever that piece is for you, like figure out what your centerpiece will be, and you need to be able to perform with that only. Because also I've been at clubs where I've come in with the Force and my Eurorack, and the guy looked at me and my guy was like, "What y'all gonna do with that?" Pointing at the Eurorack system, and we like, "Yeah, we're gonna rock with it." He's like, "Ain't no room for all that." So we put those things back in the trunk, and I've rocked with the Force. I mean, it happens.
Yeah, that's great advice. The Force is dope.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a standalone. Have you seen that, Orly? It's like a standalone box. It kind of emulates a little bit of the Ableton Live layout, which is
Hmm.
nice.
Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've connected other musicians through the Force with all their a lot of
Oh,
drummers with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
got you. All right.
And,
I'm
and you know what?
excited. I'm excited to dive into that.
You know, it could be for some people the Octatrack. So for me, it's the Force, but for good reason. But I think whatever that one piece is that you can rock without anything else, that's the piece you need to have and be proficient
Yeah,
in.
I was thinking about a Digitact connected to the other. So yeah,
Exactly.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
So excited to dive in. Thank you very much for
No doubt.
the
Cool.
insights.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Corey, for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure, as
Thanks for having me.
usual.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate you both.
Yeah, Orly, this we're on our new journey together with this. This is going to be great,
It's
and
gonna be dope.
yeah, thank you
Super,
for being
super
our
excited.
yeah.
Congrats on coming together for the show, and shout out to DubLab, and thank you both for having me.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Word.